Good evening. I'd like to call to order this special Town Council meeting for Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022, a meeting on the budget. Before we rise for a moment of silence, I want to acknowledge the passing of Holly LaFond. Holly was a friend of many of ours and well known in town, whether you knew her from the town clerk's office, from Tim Wall's office, or from her annual toy drive that she and Jim Fitzsimmons throw instead of their birthdays every December. I think her passing touches a lot of us and is noteworthy, and my thoughts go out to her family. Please rise for a moment of silence. Let the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Allenson?
Here.
Carmody?
Here.
Fishbein?
Here.
Laffin?
Here.
Barone?
Here.
Tata?
Here.
Testa?
Here.
Zandri?
Here.
Chairman Cervoni.
Here, thank you. The one item on the agenda is discussion and possible action on amendments to the town budget. Do we have any motions? Councilor Tata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion first, and then I can briefly explain. I make a motion to, actually, I have paperwork. Let me pass this out first so everyone can follow along. Yeah, and there's enough over here, Mr. Simoes. Okay, so I make a motion to A, reduce the contingency line of general government, line 58820, by $100,000. B, reduce the contingency line of Board of Education, object code 100, by $250,000. C, increase the appropriated amount from reserves audited fund balance by $1.5 million. D, fund attached list of capital items totaling $838,727 from ARPA funding and reduce corresponding budget lines by the same amounts. And E, reduce the amount of line 59232, transfer to capital and non-recurring fund of electric division pilot by $220,000 and increase cap and non-revenues line by $220,000 of ARPA funds to fund Doolittle basketball court replacement and the SCOW STEM courtyard.
Second.
Thank you. I can just give a brief explanation if that's okay. So after our budget hearings were complete, I contacted every counselor individually asking if they had budget ideas or would like to discuss the budget, and what is before us is the product of that bipartisan effort. This package will result in a tax decrease without affecting or reducing services. Every budget item is funded, just in a slightly different way, which leads to a tax decrease. During this continuing time of economic uncertainty and inflation, we are very happy to propose a tax decrease without affecting services. And I will go briefly through each of the components, but I'm sure others will have comments to add also. So A and B, under the motion, this still leaves funds on each contingency line, but recognizes that government has money in reserves and through unused funds in other departmental budgets to address contingencies as they occur. So rather than tax people for what ifs, we reduce these line items. Under letter C in the motion, I believe Councilor Zandri will most likely want to speak more on this item. I don't want to speak for him, but I assume so. But basically, this brings the line to the same amount that is in the current budget, and then just slightly more than what was in the prior budget to that. And then in regards to D and E, just as the mayor identified capital items to be paid for with ARPA funds, we also recognize items that we feel are an appropriate use of ARPA funds. By using ARPA, as the mayor stated at the public hearing, we save everyone tax dollars. The items we identified are directly related to COVID, for which ARPA offers relief funding, which are first responders, Parks and Rec, and Public Works. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Zandri.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to speak a little bit to item C. I just wanted to outline a couple of elements to that first off. So by making the request to bring it up, the designated reserve line to 7.9, what we're doing is we're presently allocating 6.4 in designated reserves right now. We're increasing it by 1.5 to make it the same amount of designated reserves that are in the current existing budget. In prior years, we have had different numbers of designated reserves applied, and there's different years of usage of these actual funds. Over the years, I've been tracking these on a year-to-year basis, and not only is that the 7.9 something we're presently doing, but when you inflation adjust prior designated reserve considerations, we are still about 30% lower than some of the other designated years. And I'm going to call back to one particular year because it stands out the most. Back in the 2005-2006 budget, we designated $6.9 million, where inflation adjusted for that, present date dollars, that's over $10 million. A lot of times the discussion becomes we're relying too much on reserves, and we're not relying on the reserves when we don't consume them. The past 5 years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have consumed a portion of them. We did return $2.4 million in the 1920 budget, but the other 4 years in question, we basically used 1.5. There was one year that we only used 140,000. Once again, when you inflation adjust these numbers, they are no worse than some of our other years. As a matter of fact, going back to 2005, 2006, if you adjust the 1.7 we actually used, that's 2.5 consumed. We've never consumed that in the near term. We've consumed 1.8 inflation adjusted, 1.7 inflation adjusted, and 1.6 inflation adjusted. So the idea here is just to the point that we already had, rather than allocating shy and taxing the taxpayers in town, we are designating more reserves, taxing them, not taxing them on that differential, with a pretty solid understanding through track record that we are likely going to use no more than 25% of what's designated, if that at all. So it's our hope through all this effort of this work that we can accept these changes and actually lower the tax impact on the residents this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Testa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more a procedural question for, excuse me. I found your proposed reduction in the contingency line of general government fairly straightforward. Am I correct to assume, in my understanding that you're reducing it from 250 to 100? Thank you. Now, on the Board of Ed's budget, it's always been my understanding that we cannot impact any particular line of their budget. So you're proposing we reduce the Board of Ed's budget by 250. That's really as far as we can go. Your justification is that you believe they can absorb that from their contingency line. But just as if when the mayor makes cuts to their budget, he says where he's taking it from, but they decide how the money's utilized. Did you by any chance speak to anyone from the Board of Education about how they felt about that particular line in their budget?
I did not after this proposal came up.
I'm sorry I wasn't here when we discussed.
No, that's okay. What
Did they say anything at that point?
No, that, I don't believe that,
Okay.
that wasn't on the table. But what we did discuss was their other contingencies. So they also, in their 2% fund, they also have a special education contingency, which consists of $647,973.
Yeah.
They also have in the 2% fund a COVID contingency, which is $231,544. And then in the budget, they have the adult ed contingency for the potential relocation, which is another $198,000. And then the object code line, which is what this would affect, is $499,844. In the current budget, it's $290,256. So that was a discussion that did take place during their budget presentation.
Right.
And that was kind of the justification why those of us, that worked on this, we felt that, like you said, we can't tell them where to take it from, but we felt that if we hit that contingency line, reduce it by $250,000 of the $499, we didn't feel they would really feel much of an effect from that based on the other contingencies they set.
No,
So that was just our suggestion, yes.
I appreciate that. And, yeah, so in effect, the suggestion is to reduce the board budget by $250,000. How it gets done is up to them, and I frankly, that's nothing that alarms me. I respect all the work that went into this. I'm looking at C, and I don't have to tell anyone that that's something I've always been a part of, efforts to manage our fund balance in this way, approaching the use of our audited fund balance in this way. I've supported and proposed quite often in the past, so I have no objection to that. I'm going to skip to E. I just want to make sure I understand this. This really has this is kind of an offset thing, isn't it? In other words, I just need this explained. We're reducing the electric division I don't want to call it allocation. I'm sorry, I'm lost on the word. The amount of money we receive from the electric division pilot to go into our cap and non-recurring fund. So you're reducing money from that and increasing cap and is that supposed to say non-revenues line, or is it non-recurring? Non-revenues line?
The cap and non-revenues line.
By 220 of ARPA funds. Okay, so okay, I'm just making sure I follow this all. You're using ARPA funds in this suggestion to pay for the Doolittle basketball court and so forth, correct? But I'm just looking for the mechanics, understand the mechanics of the reducing line 59232. I mean, where does that money go?
Sure. This was similar to what we did in, I believe it was last year, the current budget, and then I believe we also did in the budget before. So rather than having the cap and non pay for those two projects, we felt that those were ARPA, appropriate to be spent by ARPA.
Yeah.
So so we would reduce the line that the electric division pilot would be giving to cap and non, because cap and non wouldn't be paying for that, but then you need to recognize the revenue to pay for it. So the revenue would come from ARPA rather than coming from the electric division pilot.
Right.
It is an offset, like you said.
So this money would remain in the cap and non-recurring fund of the pilot, because it's not being designated already for that project, those two projects.
Correct, yes. That's the intent, at least.
No, I'm just,
Yeah.
but am I correct or mistaken in that that particular item does not impact the tax rate,
Correct.
correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, no, thank you. That's why I just got a little confused. I know this was all proposed to impact the tax increase. So this is a separate proposal because these aren't tax dollars in the first place.
Correct.
This is pilot money from the electric division, and you're just saying, let's not take that money, let's not allocate 220 out of that money, leave it in there for other use, I assume, and use 220 of ARPA. I'm just curious, and again, I'm not against this at all. I'm just wondering what was the reasoning behind this, because if the follow-up was because we have another capital project we want to use this 224 that is in the budget, that is being paid for with tax dollars, it's almost like a three-team trade in sports. So for now, it's just, but does that make sense? Like, is there another thought for where this 220 goes? Or for now, it's just, I'm just trying to follow up the whole thought pattern behind this one before I ask about D. Can that be explained?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the thought pattern was that we were looking for items in the budget, like the other items on the second page, that we thought were more ARPA appropriate than necessarily for any other place, because it sort of fits all the ARPA criteria. So that's why we allocated that money there. And then ultimately, the town could spend that $220,000 on whatever other project, came up, or whatever, other focus they had. So I don't think we had an idea of where that money needed to go. It was just, we thought it was an ARPA-ready type of project.
And yeah, okay, I appreciate that. I look at item D, and that specifies the use of ARPA funding that directly impacts the budget in a way that would be tax dollars.
Correct.
The E starts straying into using ARPA funds before we've had enough time to talk about how we're all going to decide to use ARPA funds. I mean, does that make sense? It's like, it's now you know what I mean? It's like taking the discussion of ARPA funds into the budget in a way that it does not impact the budget. And that's why I see that as a separate effort that's frankly a little harder for me to buy into right now. Only I would, if you said this at a subcommittee meeting and said, hey, this is something I'd like to do with ARPA money, and I would say, that's a good one. I don't disagree with that one. Let's put it with all the other ones we're talking about when we talk about them. But this one doesn't impact the budget at all. You see where I'm going? Does it make sense? If you said that $200,000 is now going to buy a police vehicle that was going to be paid for in the police budget with tax dollars, then there would be that final connection to the tax rate, which is what we're kind of talking about tonight. So that's why I wanted to clarify this. I may or may not disagree with this later, but it is separate from the other four, and that the other four are directly related to the tax rate. So I just want to make sure I understood that correctly, and I appreciate that. The last thing I would say is, okay, now we look at D, and so you are, in effect, just as you're doing in C, proposing the same thing in principle that the mayor proposed, just on a larger scale and in a different way, which we've always talked about in the past. The argument that you can't use reserves for our budget, we always said, well, you do already. We've always argued it's just a matter of scale. You say this is as far as we should go, and sometimes we say, well, we can go a little farther. And history has proven that we probably can, it's okay. In this case, the mayor proposed the use of some ARPA money for some capital expenditures in several departments to offset an increase in taxes, and you found 838,000 plus other capital one-time expenses that could also be paid for with ARPA, so that they're not in the budget and paid for with tax dollars. And I point that out because I wouldn't want to see the arguments against this to be strictly principled. In other words, oh, we can't do that, because that's not on principle, I object to that, because we've already seen it's proposed. And again, I'm a little uneasy about E for reasons I explained, and I would normally be very uneasy about D. But I'm also very uneasy about a tax increase, so I don't object in principle to utilizing ARPA funds without going over, what I would consider out of control, because all of these expenditures are legitimate, and while ARPA says you can't use ARPA money to, reduce your tax rate directly, but you can certainly buy things that you would have been buying with it. So I'm kind of good with A, B, C, D. I've gone on a little bit, but I wanted my understanding to be clear for myself, and my uneasiness about E to be clear, because that's separate from the tax rate. And I feel pretty strongly that I kind of like where we're going with the ARPA discussions right now, and I would rather see that in that world, but we'll see how it goes. So your motion is all of these, correct? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
But, yes, correct. The motion is for the entire package.
Okay, the motion is for the entire package, and I think, I've been hopeful and that we can continue to improve how we all work together up here, and it's been looking good. And I think in the interest of recognizing some hard work that multiple colleagues have done, if I had a little bit of a problem with one part of this whole thing, that's not enough for me to bicker about it, nor I'm not going to ask you to break it apart. I think we're going to get enough arguments against the whole thing as we go on, but I'm good with all this. I thank all of you who put this all together. A lot of it follows things that I've done myself in the past, and I'm glad that you did it this year. And I have no real objections to any of this. And I would stress, I don't think any of it is irresponsible in any way, shape, or form. Just remember, when I start proposing projects for use of the ARPA funds, you remember how magnanimous I was tonight. I'm just kidding. Thank you for the hard work, and I'm good with all of this, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence, everybody.
Mr. Senna.
Good evening. Can I just make one comment on Section E?
You don't even have to ask.
All right. So I won't comment on the other ones till the end, but on E, the 220 will reduce the tax rate by $220,000 because we're not sending the 220 to the cap and non-fund, so that's less tax.
Going?
It's not going anywhere. It's staying in the general fund.
I don't follow.
So that's
Maybe I'm missing where it's coming from then.
so the electric division sends the money to the general fund as revenue.
Right?
And then we have a budget line item that sends the whole amount to the cap and non-fund.
Right?
What this proposal is doing is it's suggesting to send 220,000 less to the cap and non-fund. So that means the 220 stays in the general fund, so there will be less taxes having to be raised.
But my understanding is you can't arbitrarily reduce the pilot.
They can, so in the past, the way they've done it is you're taking it before it gets there. Once it's in the cap and non-fund, you can't, it stays there. What this is doing is it's intercepting it before it gets there. So you guys have done this in the last 2 budget years.
we're taking pilot funds that should be earmarked only for capital by ordinance and by charter and putting it into the general fund. I don't think we can do that. What am I misunderstanding?
No, that's not what he's saying.
Okay.
The money comes from the electric division, it comes into the general fund. It's a
Right.
two-step process. So it's approximately $1.8 million. It comes into the general fund, and then we appropriate it from the general fund into the cap and non as the contribution from electric.
Right.
But as Tim has said, in the last couple of years, that's been intercepted before it gets to the cap and non and reduced. So I think one year it was $1 million taken out, only 800,000 went into the cap and non, $1 million was kept out. In this case, we'd be keeping 220,000 out. That then becomes revenue in the budget, which would go against the mill rate.
So am I correct to think, though, that the difference was, so last year, when $1 million was taken from cap and non and put into a pool reserve fund, that was different than this? Because this money is changing spending, and that $1 million that was allocated for the pool is just held in reserve.
No, because it's all one pot, so the line in the budget is to transfer the whole amount. So
Right.
if you're reducing that whole amount, then it just stays in the general fund, it's not being appropriated.
Right.
So then, in essence, it's revenue, because you're spending less.
But
Which, it's fine to do, it's what we've done in the past. So I just wanted to be clear that it does have an effect on the tax rate.
I think, Benny, to answer your question, the $1 million went into the cap and non, but it's reserved for a pool.
Right.
So it
So-
all went into the cap and
The
non.
$1 million didn't go into the cap and non, it went into a separate
Okay.
pool bookkeeping. It was a separate line that was a transfer out that went into a fund, not cap and non, into the pool fund.
But my point is that $1 million was actually appropriated.
Yes.
And the impact of E is that that money's then not appropriated.
Correct.
Okay.
But that pilot does not impact the tax rate.
It normally doesn't impact the tax rate when it's dollars for dollars. When 1.5 million comes in and 1.5 million goes out, it doesn't have an effect on the tax rate. If 1.7 comes in and only 1.5 goes out, that has an effect on the tax rate.
It's being stopped before it gets to the next step. So less money is needed in a tax increase for the 220. We did the same thing with the 800,000 2 years ago.
Right.
The council did.
Well, what I wanted to ask, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
if we are, like you mentioned, we're taking these funds and we're putting them into the general fund balance and then moving them out to cap and non-recurring, right? 200,000, in this scenario, 200,000 is staying behind. But we are also pulling a chunk of money out of the same reserve pot to back up the budget. So whether it's the 200,000 coming in or out or the 7.9 that's already there, there's this big amount of money that gets pushed out. So it is still being utilized, it's just that it's being separated.
Correct. It's all, once it's in the general fund, it's one big pot. But that entry alone, though, is to get the $2.9 million reduction, that 220 is part of, by not sending it to the cap and non fund, is contributing to the taxing decrease, is what I'm saying.
So it's not 2.9 then? It's going to end up being 3.2?
No, it will be
3.1?
2.9, the way this is,
It'll still be 2.9.
it will be 2.9.
All right, and I think that's ultimately the end result of what we were looking to do. We wanted to not only make it so that we utilize some of these ARPA funds and, designate more of the reserves to keep the pressure off the tax increase, we actually worked our way down into a tax decrease, and that met our end means, and I think that's in the spirit of what we were trying to do anyway.
And not to confuse this more, but the reason I really chimed in is the reporting for ARPA is extremely, it's going to become cumbersome and difficult as these projects, it took me several hours to be able to get onto the website, register, just to register the project. The only project we have going right now is the consultant, and then I had to make the $10 million designation. So currently, we have an ARPA fund, and for bookkeeping purposes, it would be great if all the ARPA money stays in the one fund. And what this is doing is this is moving ARPA into the cap and non-fund. So for bookkeeping purposes, I would request that you, if you're going to do the 220, to do it the way you've done in the past and use reserves in the capital non-fund and not ARPA funds for the 220.
Thank you. Counselor Tata?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to try to explain a little differently, Councilor Testa. So it's the money from the electric division is not going directly into cap and non. It has to hit the general fund first. So if you're recognizing that income, for lack of a better word, the income or the revenue into the general fund, we're still going to fund all the cap and non projects, but we're not going to, that $220,000 to fund some of those projects is going to come from ARPA. So that 220 gets left in the general fund. So all of the projects still get funded, but basically you pick up an extra $220,000 into the general fund rather than having that go into the cap and non. So that, but now I do have a question for Mr. Senna. That second part that you were just talking about. So you said there's enough reserves in cap and non to pay for that 220. So if we change the wording of this to not incorporate the ARPA funds, is there a way to do that so we still get the $220,000 tax reduction? I mean, not $220,000 tax reduction, but we're able to use that towards the tax reduction. How would you suggest specifically we would do that?
I forgot the mic was off.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
So it would be the same thing we did last year. That 220 would come from fund balance reserve in cap and non. So that's going to show up as a revenue. The 220 is going to show up as a revenue. So if we flip to that page in this budget, I can show you. Just got to find the page. If you go to page 83 in the book. So the contribution from general fund pilot would be reduced by the 220, and then the use of audited fund balance cap and non would be 220, and the revenue would still equal the expenses.
Okay, so it looks like we have, so that $1,060,000, that's kind of just sitting in cap and non right now.
That's what you designated to use last year, to balance last year's cap and non fund.
Okay. So we can still have the effect of what we're proposing, but not using ARPA for the 220 by using that line, the balance of the cap and non?
Correct.
Okay. I'm thinking, I don't know if everyone agrees or not, I'm thinking that may be the way to go because it addresses Councilor Testa's concerns about ARPA, but it still gives us the net effect that we're looking for. So if anyone wants to chime in on that, we can always amend E to reflect that. Thank you.
Counselor Morone?
So, yeah, Mr. Senna, so I think my understanding when we discussed this earlier, not you and I discussed it, when I discussed it with some of my fellow councilors, was the idea of taking these items out of the budget completely. So, like the items that we have on the next page are sort of, they're getting paid by the ARPA funds, so they're not really a part of the budget at all, right? So if they didn't get spent for that purpose, then they would come back to the ARPA fund to be spent in some other ARPA manner. So if we just paid for this out of the regular cap and non, then that doesn't accomplish that objective. And I guess I want to see the Doolittle basketball court and the Scout, like those are important projects. So I want to see those get done one way or another. But what are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts would be to to do it the way we've done in the past and leave the ARPA out of the cap and non-fund. Because, so the project's still gonna get done. And then, there's other, we have to do a bond ordinance that gets approved if we start pulling money out of this plan. That's gotta get all, it's pretty much set, packed, ready to go, which will do the work, but, so it does have the effect that you're trying to get. I think you can accomplish by doing it the way you've done in the past and leaving ARPA out of the cap and non-fund. And I think it'd just be easier to know that the, Fund 320, I believe it's Fund 325, all the ARPA money came in there, all the ARPA money got spent there.
Thank you.
Counselor Testa?
Excuse me. Leaving all discussions of ARPA aside, I'm having issues with your representation on the tax impact of this. Let me look at it this way. On page 84, I see 222, 223, 2022, 2023. These are the suggested expenditures that will be made out of the cap and non-recurring fund, which is the 1.751, et cetera, pilot money from the electric division. Correct?
This page is showing the 2023 is what's getting appropriated through this budget process.
Right.
The other columns are just showing the town's plans. Those numbers aren't.
Oh, I understand the rest. I'm just talking about that one column. Let's stay in that one column. That column is telling us we're going to get 1.751362 from the electric division. That's the annual pilot.
Well, minus 11,000 for admin.
Fine.
So
that's
it's 1762362 is what's coming in.
Got it. That's what I'm looking at. So, and the way the ordinance is written and all that other stuff, these projects are planned. The plan is to do these projects with that money. So they're not being paid for with tax revenue. That is a revenue source that we are obligated to use for only capital projects. So far, so good, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you say to me, you know what? That Doolittle court, that $200,000, I'm going to, why don't we use ARPA money for that? Say, okay, so what do you want to do with that $200,000? You have to do another capital project with that money. You can't put it back in the general fund and then offset taxes by $200,000. That's not what this money is allowed to be used for.
That's not what we were, that's not
Well,
what.
that's what it was, how it was explained to me. That's how it was just explained to me.
No, so.
Okay? That's why I asked, if you were offsetting this, if you said, okay, we're gonna go fix another $200,000 worth of curbs and put those in this line, because we have to use 1.751 on capital projects. That's the ordinance and the charter. You can't say, I'm not gonna do that 200,000, I'm gonna use ARPA for that, without allocating that 200 to another capital project. You can't just apply it to the budget to offset $200,000 in taxes. That's what my argument was. Am I missing something? Yes?
I'm not understanding your question.
My question is, the money in here, this line, this column, that's not tax dollars. It's revenue, but it's not tax revenue. And there are strict guidelines by ordinance and charter on how we use that money.
Correct.
So if we choose not to use the $200,000 on the Doolittle basketball court, we have to use that money for another capital project that falls within the guidelines of the ordinance. We can't just say, oh, we're using ARPA money, let's throw that 200 into the general fund, and lo and behold, that's 200 less we have to collect in taxes now. You can only do that if you've identified another capital expenditure that was going to be paid for with tax dollars, and move that over into this column. You can't just put it in there and offset taxes. That's all I'm saying.
Agreed, but what this conversation is saying is this 1.7 million is appropriating the money once it gets into the cap and non-fund.
Right.
What the proposed adjustment is doing is not letting the money get there. So only 1.5 million is going to get there. And then you're going to say, okay, we're going to still fund these projects with $200,000 of reserves that are in the cap and non-fund currently.
Where's that other 200,000 going to go?
It stays in the general fund.
Yeah, no, I can't buy that.
I think I understand where some of the confusion is coming,
can't
because
buy
when we intercepted it in the past, we stuck it.
We allocated it somewhere. That was a legitimate expense. Yeah, I'm not, I'm trying to be argumentative. I'm just, you can't, I am being argumentative, but not to be argumentative.
So I think we've got a couple of
I'm a
options.
stickler for
No,
procedure.
we'd rather do
One
it
at a
right.
time, for the
I think
record.
we've got a
One
couple
at
of
a time.
different options, right?
Okay.
Well, I mean, we could either strike that out, leave it alone, or we could just take the 220,000 and add it to community pool. It's got to be allocated to something.
Well, there's a lot of other things we could use it for.
Or the third idea.
All I'm getting at is, I don't think we can legitimately take the $220,000 in savings that the proposed use of ARPA is suggesting, and use it to reduce the tax revenue line by that amount of money, because that is not an appropriate use of the cap and non-recurring money that comes from the electric division. That's what I'm saying.
Mayor?
Yeah, I think, and once again, it won't be cap and non-money, because prior to it getting in on that page, that figure will be reduced to 1.5 instead of 1.7 million. So there's $200,000 that now is not going into cap and non. So that now is no longer an expense from the money raised. The way it appears here, it's an expense of general government to fund cap and non. 200,000 is no longer an expense. So then, I think, Tim, that's your point. Now it has still been raised and it's in the budget, but it's revenue that's going to reduce the mill rate. Is that?
If I just may read from the budget book. Municipal Ordinance 61, enacted by the council in 64, created the reserve fund, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The fund is financed from the electric division sales, et cetera, et cetera.
Counselor Testa, while you're reading.
But well, it doesn't say it in this one,
I
I'm
think-
sorry.
I think-
It can't be used for general expenses.
I think that where they're distinguishing is that you're saying, you're interpreting the ordinance as saying if it's coming from the electric division, it has to go into cap and non, and has to be used for capital projects. And I think what I'm hearing is the way the ordinance is read is, if the money doesn't get to cap and non-recurring, then it's excluded. So that ordinance governs money that has been allocated into the cap and non-fund.
It's also cap and non-recurring expenses, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a capital project. Just be a non-recurring expense.
As I said, if you want to find an expense to designate that meets the criteria, do so. You can't just put it back in the fund to offset the taxes. That's all I'm saying. Find something else, buy a car, do something.
Mr. Chairman?
Mayor?
Yeah, on the revenue page, on revenues, it shows pilot electric division, 41190, which is 1,762,362. What we're doing is changing that. So, well, we're not changing that. That money is coming in, but the expenditure is not all going out. 200,000 is not going out. So that leaves the 200,000 in the revenue.
I'll stop, but I'm going to go on record as saying I object to the potential use of this $200,000 in the general fund to offset taxes. I think that's inappropriate.
Is that a motion?
No, it's a point of order, it's an objection, I think we're making a mistake. I've been dealing with this fund for 20 years. I think it's a mistake. I don't think it's allowed, what we're saying. It's not allowed. Drop it.
Councilor Laffin.
Thank you. Originally, I was going to try and help answer Councilor Testa's question or concern, but I think we've all got that figured out now or understood. Not that I with you, Councilor Testa, as far as on the use of that money, but I understand what maneuver is trying to occur to make it happen. So I'm going to ask another question then, I guess to Mr. Senna. When you were talking about the 838,727 ARPA money from D, you don't want it to come from ARPA, so you want it to come from that kind of leftover cap and non-money?
Sorry, I wasn't talking about D, I was only talking about the 220.
You were only talking about the 220, okay. So for what then, is it easier then, and I'm not saying I agree either, I'm trying to work out the logistics, you basically remove all of the items D from the budget and then allocate and pay for them from ARPA later on?
I believe that's what this motion is doing.
So D removes, you're removing them from the budget entirely? Okay, all right.
Just like the ones.
I thought you were infusing the budget with ARPA funds to then pay for them. Okay. Okay. I'm still processing. I'm fine with the cuts. The 1.5 million, I know it's to bring us back up to last year, but that was also an increase from the council as well. I mean, Councilor Zandri's chart of the last 5 completed and audited budgets, only one has not put money into only one has put money into the savings account, into the general fund, including the budget from 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, sorry, the 1.8, which would have been 2.8, but we kept the Board of Ed money. So I have a concern about the moving of the money and everything, which I objected again. I mean, it's kind of that budget ended up flushing out as I said it would. Actually a little heavier than I thought it would. And we were able to rebound by keeping the Board of Ed 1 million. I'm just concerned because we are in the middle of the 21-22 budget, which was modeled or done similarly as the year before. And now we're going to add another 1.5 from the, leaning on another 1.5. That's all. I get it. I get the need or the desire, sorry, to not raise taxes. But as predicted by all, it follows a practice that I've, for the last 10 years, not participated in. And I agree with Councilor Testa on the 220 part. And the ARPA thing is a whole different can of worms. But, okay, all right, thanks.
Counselor Zandri.
I'm going to defer to Counselor Tata.
Thank you. Counselor Testa, I don't know if this, maybe this, I think I have a different way of looking at it, maybe. So the electric division, that's coming out of money that they made off of, their business, basically. They're off the ratepayers. So let's say the electric division made $10 million last year, and they said, we can give the town $10 million. But then we say, well, we don't have $10 million worth of cap and non-projects. We're not gonna let them keep the $10 million and have it sit in their savings account. We wanna still give it back to the taxpayer. So maybe we say, all right, well, we'll take the $10 million, but we only have $5 million worth of projects that we wanna do with cap and non. So we'll take the $10 million, put it in the general fund, $5 million will go to cap and non for these projects, and the other $5 million, we'll just keep it in the general fund to reduce taxes, because we still want the money to go to the people. We just don't need that much in cap and non. That's kind of how I'm viewing it. So the money hits the general fund, and then it goes to cap and non based on what cap and non needs. So if cap and non doesn't need that 220, we still want to give it back to the taxpayers, so we leave it in the general fund. All the projects still get funded, but then we're able to reduce the taxes by that amount. That's just how I'm looking at it. Thank you.
Well, I would just simply say that would not be allowed.
I believe it is allowed, though, correct? Because we did that 2 years ago, I believe, right?
Well, nobody
Done
sued
in the
us.
last two budget cycles.
Yeah, we've done it.
2 years ago, $800,000 was intercepted. That was one of my objections. This is only 220. Only. I have a comment, though, when you're done responding.
Okay, I'll let it go.
Mr. Senna?
I'd like to make a comment on C. So when we issued bonds in August to get our bond rating, I have to do a phone call with Moody's. They ask questions, and they were very concerned with the 7.9 that was currently being used for reserves in our budget. And they asked a lot of questions of what was our plan, and I said our plan is to not use that much in the future. So we need to keep in mind that we have a police station that's going to need to be bonded, possibly a pool. Interest rates are going up. And right now, currently, we don't even have 10% in unreserved fund balance of the budget, which is what they like to see. But right now, we're looking at a $180 million budget. Our fund balance should be around 18 million, undesignated, and we're at 14. And now we're gonna, this is taking 1.5 million more out of that. So I just wanted to, in my professional opinion, I believe that taking 1.5 more out of reserves is not appropriate at this time.
Counselor Zandri?
So I just want to follow up on that statement of using these funds. This gets said every year, and it drives me insane. We don't use these funds. We designate them for use, and we only use them when we actually burn into them. And I was real careful earlier when I made my points that over the past 5 budgets, we did do some consumption across 4 of the 5. We dropped back in 2.4 million, and that always escapes the discussion. We burn 1.4, we burn 1.5, we burn 140,000, then we return 2.4, we burn another 1.7, basically. So are we going negative? Yes, presently we're going negative, but we never speak to the 7 years prior to that where we did nothing but infuse this thing with money. 600,000, 1.6, 2.1, 760,000, 2 million, and 1.6. I don't like the confusion that gets caused when we use the word use. We designate, and this happened with your predecessor too. I just want to make sure that all of us understand, and all the people that are watching at home, and when this ends up getting reported in the newspaper, this is an allocation. This is no different than me taking out of my savings account and padding my checking account, and then at the end of the year, I don't spend it all, and I put some of it back, or more of it back, or all of it back, and then some. This is what we've done year in and year out. If the credit rating agencies are going to penalize us, what is the difference, what is the potential difference in our bonding rate? If we went from one tier to the next, what's the differential?
I don't have the answer to that. It depends on where the interest rates are currently in the market. I think I know the better bond rate you have, the better interest rate you get.
I understand that, and that's the same thing as with personal credit and your credit score, right? I mean, if you've got a variable rate loan and your credit score takes a little bit of a hit, yeah, the rate goes up. But it's also a matter of what we're doing on the other side of it. So again, the discussion point, rates go, we could do everything crystal perfect, not touch our credit rating at all, and the interest rate could still go up. We've got a bond anyway, and we're going to pay more. So the other side of it is, we don't do all of this. We maybe get hit with an increase on our bond rate anyway. It's going to cost us more to borrow the money anyhow, and we're going to have to increase the taxes on the people a second time. One time because we don't do this decrease, and another time because the bonding rate changes. I want to make sure that we're clear that there's an undesignated portion of this general fund balance that is there to cushion our placement with the credit rating agencies, but it presently sits at $26 million. Some of it is,
14 million.
How can the general fund balance be $26 million and you're saying that it's 14? You're talking about what's undesignated, correct?
Correct, that's what the rating agencies look at,
What's undesignated.
what is undesignated.
Right. But the general fund balance total is the undesignated amount plus what we've committed to the current budget that's running, which by history has returned 2/3 of what we've allocated or better, even in the years that we consume pieces of it. We allocate 7.2 million, we consumed 1.7. We allocated 6.2, we consumed 140,000. We allocated 6 million, we returned all of it plus 2.4. Those are the factors that we're looking at up here. So I understand that they're looking at, gee, there's only 14 million left because they've allocated and designated toward the active budget this bucket of cash. But when the budget closes, we're audited and it closes, well, I'll use this current year 7.9, maybe 5.9 comes back. So there's still money that's floating in there that doesn't get spent. We've got salaries in the current budget we're not going to spend. We don't have a health director right now. Your department was low on people throughout the course of the year. There's money in the budget. And I want us all to remember that, because it's a concern, and we all agreed when we were discussing this, that these are very real things to consider. And I don't like to use the term dice roll, because then it sounds like we're gambling up here, but we're not. Because we've got a proven track record. We've never yet consumed more than $2 million out of more money designated, ever. And I've got the numbers going all the way back to 2003. So if the contention is E, then we could do a friendly amendment up here or figure something else out. I'm fine with it. But we have, where was the concern in 2017, 2018, where we were getting vetoed up here on the budget? We designated $7.2 million that year, and we had $26 million. It was the same thing. 26.28 in the total general fund balance is the same 26.8 that we've got now. And we were fine with 7.2 back then, which actually inflation adjusted is 8.2. So I I understand the concern. I think we all understand the risk involved. I would also like to ask, for the purposes of bonding, a lot of different towns that do all their different bonding for the cost in the budget to the taxpayer. I think there's a thing called cost per capita when you talk about bonding rates, like how much it costs each person. The last time I looked, and I'm going to be honest, it's been about 3 or 4 years that I looked, the cost per capita, we were almost half the rate of other towns of a similar size. So generically speaking, one town about our size, the cost per capita was $2,000 per taxpayer, and we were $1,000. Are we still that low, or have we inflated? Or do you, and you may not have these numbers.
I don't have that.
You don't have them
information
handy.
currently.
When I look, and again, I'm being honest with the numbers. When I looked 4 years ago, we were half of everybody else. And I don't want to start comparisons, our town, this town, other town, we do it different. I don't want to put the pressure on the taxpayer. When we've been talking all these ARPA meetings, we need relief to the business owners, we need relief to the taxpayers. We've been talking about trying to figure out a tax freeze to help the seniors. This is relief to everybody across the board. And I think we can do it, and I want to see us do it. If the big concern is line E, I'm completely wide open to a discussion on it, but I want to see this thing through. I appreciate the concern on line C. I guess we're going to find out when we go out to bond what this may or may not do. The credit rating agencies are going to say, but I would have to believe that they're going to be more in favor of lending us money than some other towns that are in way worse shape than us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Allenson?
So I guess my question, and maybe I didn't know to ask this along the way, is how much money is designated currently to projects that are either completed or won't be completed? And I ask this because we designated $1 million in the last budget for the pool, but we know that's not going to be completed. So can't we undesignate that $1 million and use that towards this 1.5? Because we're going to end up having to bond the rest anyways. So if we designate another 1.5, we're going to screw ourselves.
So the $1 million for the pool wasn't a designation. That was actually an appropriation, and a transfer was made to that fund.
So what's it doing now?
Now it's sitting there.
So can it
So
come back?
It could, someone could make a motion to transfer it back, yes.
All right. I would make that motion before I make a motion, or before I accept a motion to increase appropriated funds.
Are you saying you would, or are you trying to make that motion?
I'll make the motion. I don't know if anyone's going to second it.
There's a motion on the floor, so you can only.
So can I motion to make an amendment that 1 million be moved from the pool fund to offset this item C
You can.
request?
You can make an, yes, you can make an amendment to the motion and see if you get a second to the amendment.
Okay.
So what you're seeking to amend the motion to do is to allocate the pool line to reduce the 1.5 million that's coming out of the unallocated reserve.
Yes, but my problem is I don't want the 1.5 million coming out of the reserve. If we're gonna take anything out of the reserves, the reserve balance, I would rather have it just be items that are not gonna be completed, such as the pool. We know it's not gonna be completed, and if it does get completed, it's going to have to be bonded. I'm sure somebody's gonna recommend that we spend ARPA on it, because that's, God knows we're gonna spend everything else on it, so, it is, I don't think, considering the amount of things that we already have in the pipeline that we need to, get bonding for, I don't know that it's our best option to say, to take and add risk for those who are essentially bonding us. So I don't honestly know what that looks like for me.
So I guess I'm trying to understand your attempted amendment. Is it,
My attempted amendment would be that we do not use item C and unallocate items that are not, that we are not going to use. So, such as the pool. So move back from the pool fund the $1 million that we appropriated last year to it, despite the fact that nothing moved on it. So wouldn't it be more responsible to take allocations that we aren't using to offset, to,
I understand your argument
yes.
completely. So I'm just,
I'm not very good at making it come out right.
that's not the problem.
Sorry.
I'm just trying to narrow your amendment to something that somebody can, that we can somehow add to this motion. Or
Sure.
Point of clarification.
Sure.
Is that $1 million pool money, though, that was in the cap and non account, no? No, it's in a separate tucked away. Okay, thanks, that's right.
It's in a separate fund.
It may come up again, but I'm trying to read and do numbers.
So I-
Sorry,
I have a-
thank you.
I have a question as well. Mr. Sena, if that $1 million is allocated to a pool line that we're not using, the credit rating agencies look at that as an allocation somewhere else, and that's not another element that they're looking at, right? That 12 or 13 or 14 million dollars that's unappropriated, they say, that's all you've got, not this extra million, correct?
No, they take in the whole picture.
So they take the 14 million unallocated and 1 million that's sitting over there not spent?
They take in whatever the reserves are for the whole town, all funds.
So now I'm confused because you said it was, they look at the unallocated balance.
That's there's many factors they look at. One of the most important factor, as far as I've been told, is that you're supposed to have between 10 and 15% of your budget in an undesignated fund balance.
Okay, so we haven't had that in a while now.
I believe last year might be the first time we dipped below that, but I would have to check.
Well, I would be hard pressed to agree with that because, you know, our budget was 5 years ago was $160 million. We had 26. We had 7.2 allocated. So that takes it below right there. But I don't want to go too far down that hole. I appreciate the conversation, but I want to make sure I'm clear because I thought I heard you say undesignated balance, and it sounded like a main focus. But they will look at other. They'll say, okay, they've got $1 million in a pool fund, which they haven't moved on in the past couple of years. They've got $500,000 over here in unspent, finished, completed projects that have not rolled back yet. So we'll look at that as extra cash they could pull back. So they look at other things as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's helpful for us so that we know the main focus is unallocated. We could spend this on a dime if we had to repay debt. But they also look at other things that they could move it around and cover more debt if they needed to. So I think it also helps that our grand list grew too a little bit because again, this is other things that the credit agencies are going to look at as well. Thank you.
Mr. Sena, would moving money from a designated pool fund help? Or will it not? because obviously I'm not gonna make a motion to amend if it's not gonna do anything for us.
I believe it probably would help because it's shown the main fund has the balance available and it's no longer designated for the pool. It's available for anything.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Laffin.
Thanks. That was so long ago, I don't even remember. I did, I'm gonna open up those notes. Okay. Sorry, I stepped out for a second, but Counselor Xander, I heard you talking about like the bank and checking account versus savings account. If you don't keep a certain balance in your savings account though, or your checking account, then the bank charges you fees sometimes. And I think that's kind of what the fear with Moody's is. They're not gonna charge us a fee, but they're not gonna give us as good of a bond rating or a bond score. I have the August Moody's report, and I've seen the 2021, and I'm trying to get the 2021 again. It pulled from online. They basically say the same thing, that the reasons for the rating are material increase in reserves and continued tax-based growth, factors that could lead to a downgrade, deterioration of reserves, and liquidity. The 2020 report blatantly said, and I will find it, that typically the demographics of a community like Wallingford would not support the bond rating that they've been awarded, but because of the consistent operations and budgeting and blah, 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 they have climbed into this category. That was, maybe it was 2019 actually. I think it was 2019 because the pandemic was kind of like revving up. I have the continued concern that, as Mr. Senna said, especially as we need it for police station, and I still want to say the pool, that it's going to cause problems. And we've never used more than $2 million. We would have last year if we didn't take the Board of Ed money back. It would have been $2.8 million. And we don't use the 7.9, but there's a correlation. Like, so there's a gray wiggle space in there somewhere that none of us understand exactly. But there is a space. When we added the money, when the council changed the budget 2 budgets ago, the first one here that's audited, the last one that's audited, it was 2.8 down. If we didn't change that, it probably still would have been down. It just wouldn't have been 2.8. I'm really concerned about going deeper and deeper. Again, I'm not even thinking about D yet, which was the whole ARPA thing. I just have concerns about C, E. Of course I do, because I've said that over the years. But again, if you guys have the votes, I don't want to have us be here for hours and hours on end. You already know how I feel. It's mostly the same council that I've already explained all this to. I don't know what else to say. I appreciate the effort and it's creative. And again, the cuts, great. As I've said in the past, I'm just gonna leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Counselor Marone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate Councilor Laffin's comments, actually, because he's always been a very thoughtful counselor, and I appreciate the seriousness with which you approach these sort of these budget requirements. We've spent a lot of time in this chamber talking about how to help people, coming out of the pandemic. The economy is kind of in the toilet, with double-digit inflation. Home lending rates are rising rapidly. The cost of fuel, everything has kind of gotten more expensive. So I think if this was 5 years ago, I probably would have agreed with you. But I think that we've reached that time now where we need to do what we can to try to help, help the people of this town, right? So we're trying to look at the ARPA funds in a way to help businesses, help residents, and I think that keeping sort of our thumb down on taxes is another good way to help people. Our bond rating went down, I don't remember what year exactly, but it was certainly when I was in the council, so it was sometime in the past 6 years. Our bond rating went down essentially through no fault of our own, right? So we had kept the 10%, and sort of done all the things we thought we needed to do, and the bond rating still went down. And sometimes it just has to do with, we're in a state that's not very good with money. right? There's other factors, the changing demographics of our town, other factors that go into the bond rating that we don't really have any control over. We're also not a town that tends to bond a lot of things, right? So if you don't bond a lot, then really, what does it matter obviously you want to have a better bond rating, you want a better credit than no credit, but if you don't bond a lot, the impact of those bonds isn't felt nearly as hard. In addition, had we bonded some of the projects like the police station and the pool, not that we knew per se, but had we bonded those things when our bond rating was better a few years ago when money was cheap, then, we would have had a better result. So while I appreciate where you're coming from, I don't think you can hold off, forever in an attempt to sort of reach this magical formula. We're always going to bond, right? Because it's part of what we do in municipal government. But I think that there's if you're trying to balance the scales between helping people and trying to maintain our excellent credit rating, I think now I lean a little bit towards helping the residents of our town. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Laffin?
Yes. I agree with you, but that's what we've done the last 2 years, and I'm worried that we've dug through. So had we not gone more along the lines of what I had originally said, and we're at this point now, then I would we increased our general fund. Let's lean on a little more or something. But we did that, or we've been doing it. This will be the 3rd year of doing it. So that is my continued concern. It's just that we did that already, is where I guess it's a short way of saying that. So, but I get it. Thank you.
Councilor Zandri?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Councilor Laffin used the example of the checking account, and I think he's used it years before because I've come back with the same thing. Any particular checking account that's going to give you free checking or not charge you monthly requires you to have $1,000 in it. It doesn't do any good to have $10,000 in it, except to have the buffer and the cushion and the security. I kind of echo Councilor Marone's sentiment that we don't bond a lot of things, and I'll even throw the caveat out there, but we're gonna with the police department. So I'm real sensitive to that too. I don't want anybody to think that I'm not concerned with that, but I do look back to the last big period of time. We had a great big drawback in this town, and that was 2006, 2007 budget, 2007, 2008, and moving forward from there. The inflation-adjusted amount of that $6.9 million back then was $10 million. 6.9 designated versus a general fund balance of $21 million. So we reduced $21 million by almost 7. So we basically brought the general fund unallocated balance back then to $14 million. And I wasn't part of the council back then. I was just starting to get more involved with it, and I didn't hear all of this concern back then. I hear a lot of it now. Maybe there should have been a lot of it back then. I don't know. I didn't really start getting dug in deep until a year before I got elected the first time. But the point that I'm trying to make here is there's always going to be these concerns. If the focus right now is all this discussion on making sure people are as whole as possible by helping them out with the ARPA funds, and again, I'm going to echo what I said earlier, looking about the tax freeze for the seniors and other things that we can do. This effort here is going to take a decade worth of, I don't want to call it over appropriation through taxing, because trying to hit less than 1% differential wiggle either side of the budget is like, it's like needle in a haystack shooting. You don't do it. These are rounding errors when it comes to a municipal budget of this size. But we have shown a past precedent of having too much money going into taxing the residents, and the last 4 out of 5 years flipped the other way, and 1 year the impact was cushioned, to your point, by pulling back part of the 2% fund from the Board of Education. Since there's been this big push on we've got to find ways to help the people, I think we take our chances, do a budget like this, which keeps all the services fully intact, cuts the budget and cuts the taxes by $500,000 and see where we end up on bonding for the police station and other things that we've got to do, because much to Councilor Marone's point, we can do absolutely positively everything the right way, and they could lower our bond rating in any way, and we're going to pay more anyhow. Now, could it be made another factor worse by some of this activity? Maybe. Maybe then we bond a little bit less, or we push one other project out. But the time is now to continue to keep this downward pressure on this budget, and we've got a chance to do so without cutting a single one of these services out. Same service level, less dollars. I'm all for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Allenson.
So we sit here kind of week after week and listen to people tell us about how the town is devaluing and whatever. The projects need to be done, and all of these things are, kind of like left unmaintained. And yeah, we're maintaining the same service level with less money. But if we want to improve things, sometimes you have to pay for it. It has to come from somewhere. So I'm not saying that I'm for taxing people unnecessarily, but I am not for taking things from the reserves when we're going to be paying them for the next 20 years, when we have the opportunity to move funds around from other areas of our already earmarked funds that we're not using currently. My other concern is naturally, so far, I'm not saying I'm necessarily opposed to it, but we're earmarking $1.645 million approximately, give or take, from ARPA funds with this budget. It's not just the 838, because when we add the already proposed items from the budget, that's where we are. I understand that these are necessary items and that they can provide some relief to the people. I don't necessarily, again, have a problem with that. However, I do have a problem with the idea that we're just going to have another discussion next week where we continue to deplete ARPA funds for more projects. And what happens eventually when those funds run out for ARPA? And now we have to go back to paying for our own stuff that we want to get. So like I said, I'm not necessarily opposed to item D, but I do want to put it out there that 1.6 million is a lot, and I can't wait to see what the next proposals will be. But I can't agree with item C as it is. I would rather reduce it to 1 million and take it from the pool fund, because again, we don't have enough money in that fund to fund it completely, so we should bond it. And by doing so, we do have the opportunity to maintain a decent bond rating while also not increasing taxes to the people. We stay at a 0 level. Although I don't honestly know what's happening with item E, because apparently it's not really a real thing. So item E, apparently it just stay like that doesn't impact us either way if we just move it around, Mr. Senna? The 220? It does.
It does impact. It's part of the
Okay.
2.9 reduction.
All right. So, I don't know, maybe we find some undone project somewhere else, but I would say I would rather search for those things than continue to deplete our reserves and not learn our lesson from this last cycle, especially as rates go up.
Councilor Laffin. Oh, Councilor Tata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would certainly be all for using money from unfunded projects. I did look for those. I don't think there are a lot left. I did identify, I think, $72,000 of projects that I thought were closed out from cap and non, and then I was informed that we actually used that with the parking lots. So I'm all for that if you can find them. Happy to take it from there. I'm not sure that I could locate much in unspent on projects. But again, happy to use those if they're there. To use the money for the pool, I'm not sure that taking that would, so we have $1 million towards the pool. Let's say we end up bonding it. Let's say worst case scenario, because we don't move that $1 million, our bond rating goes down, worst case scenario. And then we end up bonding the pool anyway. I still don't think the interest that will incur from us getting a lower bond rating because of that will make up $1 million, because the total, I believe the total interest was about 2.4 million originally. So even if the bond rating goes down, I don't think it's going to cost us another $1 million. So I understand the argument there, but I don't know that would make much of a difference. So in the interest rate, even if it were to make the bond rating go down. Councilor Laffin, you said, if you have the votes, and I understand what you're saying, but I hate that comment, because I would love for this to be all of us. I would love for this to be a nice, a nice year where we can say, we didn't reduce services and we were still able to reduce taxes. And so to me, I really tried to come up with things that I thought all of us could support. Certainly everyone's entitled to their opinion, but there were things that I had on my initial list that I thought were good ideas, and I would talk to one person and they would say, "Oh no, I'm not supporting that," and we took them off. So this list was supposed to be, hopefully, something that I thought we could all get behind, and that's why a lot of the other ideas were scrapped, and this is what we ended up with. For me, either keeping the taxes flat or even a slight reduction is really a priority for me on the council, and I think you all, over my last term, I've really worked for that, especially with the financial state of everything. Now, like Councilor Maroon was saying, inflation and fuel, and things are rough for people, and so I would love for us to just be able to say, we didn't add to that, and I think these ideas really do that without reducing services. And if we have to rely on ARPA a little bit, I mean, that is what ARPA was. It was the COVID recovery. That's what it's for. So if we can rely on that a bit to not raise taxes, I think that's a good use of that. The other things here too, we understand the potential risks that Mr. Senna said about using the reserves, but then again, I look at history and I look at Councilor Zandri's chart, and you got to look at the numbers, and I don't know that I think it's a risk I'm certainly willing to take, because I think factually, based on history, I don't think it's a big risk. So that's certainly a risk I'm willing to take on that one. All of these ideas too, I just want to note, these are also things that I felt that the administration could support, in the sense that they're all things that were already in the mayor's budget, and we just maybe added to them a little bit. So using ARPA for some capital items, and relying on the reserves a bit. All things that the mayor did, just we upped them a little bit, and then added in a few other ideas. So those are just my general comments, and I'm hopeful that we can all support this. If not, then I would hope that others maybe can present ideas that can reduce taxes or keep it flat, because I think that's really important for people this year, and I think they're relying on us for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Zandri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Senna, when we do bonding, it's 30 years normally, is that correct? Or is it 20?
It depends, but it's usually between 20 and 30. 20
All right,
is the
so
middle.
just because I want to use a generic example, and I don't want to necessarily pick on the pool or the police station, if we were going to bond something like $25 million, we would probably shoot for 30 years?
Most likely, yes.
And presently, and this is a guess, I'm not holding you to it, what do you think our bonding rate would be on something like that? Just a spitball guess, it doesn't have to be
The
perfect.
interest rate,
Yeah,
I couldn't even tell you right now.
what are we paying currently on something that we're paying on today?
Well, the last time we went out, I think it was like 1% when we refinanced, but as soon as the Federal Reserve pushed up the interest rates, the municipal bond market was the first thing that went up. So if I had to take a guess, I would say we'd be right now, and this is just a guess, but I would say somewhere between 2.25 and 3.
Okay, so I'll use 3, just because you're taking a guess, and that's nothing I want to hold you to it. I just want to make people aware of what that means. With the $25 million that we might have to bond for something, or a handful of somethings that we pile them all together at 3% interest over 3 years, the total interest payments on that is $13 million. So there is absolutely a need to try to keep as much downward pressure on this as possible. So I want to make sure that we all completely understand that. If we had to go out for a bunch of different things that totaled $25 million, or the police station project, and we couldn't get 2.25, and we ended up at 3, we're talking about $13 million. And the difference between 2.25 and 3 is $9.4 million. You can see the difference of 75 basis points. So it's important. But at the same time, we don't have a lot of these big projects. We've got big projects coming up, and then there are years and years and years we've had this sub I don't want to call it subprime rate, but very, very low. And we've benefited from that on the positive side. There's pressure all around. So I really think, and we spent a lot of time, much to Councilor Tada's point, we juggled all kinds of different items that some people said there's just no way they could get behind. And, even looking at, option E, if there's a really big contention point on that, I suppose it's something we could do, an amendment on the floor. I understand Councilor Allenson's concern about leveraging and designating more reserves than what we are already using. I like to look at that, and I understand her sentiment. I really do. They are an opportunity to keep that downward pressure there. It's money in the savings account. The only way a town develops a savings account is progressively over time, collecting more taxes than they spend. That is on the backs of the people that live here, have their businesses here, and so on. And some of these people that have got businesses don't live here, so they don't even get a chance to vote. And I'm going to harp on my regular adage that there are people that have been overtaxed over the years by nothing more than, the fact that it's very hard to hit a narrow moving target. So I'm not suggesting this is done on purpose, but when they move out of town, they never get to recollect or get some extra benefit out of these other years where money went into the savings account. I've used the example of my sister who moved out of town, overpaid for a number of years, didn't get any future benefit of lower taxes some year or an extra road paved. My mother still lives in town but doesn't own any real property anymore other than her car. She also spent years of being taxed, not really seeing an extra benefit because we're buffering up the savings account. This is where people that are still here get some of that benefit, by getting a little bit of downward pressure. We've spent 2 years holding it, and now we've got this little extra nudge where we might be able to lower it. I'd like to see us do it. So again, I know it's a reach for some of us, and I'd like to see us get there. But I appreciate, I want to say too, before I close, I want to say that I appreciate all the discussion that's been up here tonight, in favor, opposed to, because it's all been professional. It's all been on skill, knowledge, experience, and an understanding of position. It's been very appropriate. And I think over the number of years that, like I said, I've been directly involved and even indirectly involved as a spectator, and I've seen some pretty ugly years up here, that even with the inability for 9 of us to get the common ground, I think that it's awesome that we're all kind of in the same area. Maybe some of us are just too far beyond the edge to vote in support of this, but everybody has been very good about being professional about the differences, and I really appreciate that. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Marone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say a special thanks to Councilor Tata, because she did poll everyone in the council, and that's sort of what got us talking about it. I also respect the discussion. I think this is, like, to really dig in on the budget, I think this is the function of this council. So with that being said, I'm going to call the question on this motion.
There's a motion to call the question. Is there a second on the motion to call the question? Seconded by Councilor Testa. I guess we'll do a roll call vote. This is the motion to call the question.
Allenson,
Yes?
Carmody,
Yes.
Laffin,
Yes.
Barone,
Yes.
Tata,
No.
Testa,
Yes.
Zandri,
No.
Chairman Cervoni.
I vote yes. The question is called.
Council,
So,
Chairman Cervoni,
Oh.
I am present.
Councilor Fishbein, your vote should be considered. So how do you vote on the motion to call the question?
I vote yes.
And
Got it.
so now the roll call vote on the motion on the table, and please do not forget Councilor Fishbein.
I will not.
Excuse me, this is A, B, C, D, E.
It's all been moved together.
Cool.
All set?
Yes.
Allenson.
No.
Carmody,
Yes.
Fishbein,
Yes.
Laffin,
No.
Marone,
Yes.
Tata,
Yes.
Testa,
Yes.
Zandri,
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
No, but the ayes have it. The motion passes. Are there any other motions on the budget? Councilor Marone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So, all right, I'll give the motion first, and then I'll explain where I'm coming from with this. So what I'd like to do is reduce the fire department salary line by $65,788, which is the cost of the 2 additional EMTs that were proposed for this year. And in addition, whatever ancillary funds in terms of benefits or whatever, I'll let Mr. Senna work on. And I'd like to put that money into contingency. And then I would like to take $50,000 from the cap and non to fund a consultant study of the fire department. I think if you look at the fire department over the past few years, there's been a lot of changes. So we started with the ambulance was going to be I'm losing the word here, but it was going to be a fund where like sort of a enterprise fund. Thank you, Tom. It's supposed to be an enterprise fund. And then the enterprise fund thing kind of fell apart, and they changed the staffing model. And then the replacement pay line of their budget was sort of in round numbers in the $700,000 range through 2020. Then in 2020, we had the incident where they went sort of $600,000 over the replacement pay line. And then in 21 and 22, they've essentially doubled the replacement pay line to $1.3 million. So my concern is that if we add another ambulance at this point, without knowing the full ramifications, I'm not sure that we have any control of the salary line in the fire department. And no disrespect to the fire chief, certainly, because I think they do a great job. I think they provide a great service, but I have a lot of concerns about where that department's headed and where their salaries are headed. Or do we have the right staff? Is this an issue of do we have too few firefighters and we're paying for too much out of replacement pay? So I understand, that in firefighting, some of it is, a firefighter might have an expectation that they make a certain amount out of overtime and so on and so forth. And that's okay, but I'm concerned about are we able to provide the level of service that we're required to? So that's the, in terms of the consultants, I talked to some fire chiefs in other departments, and they gave me some names of some consultants, and I don't really need to be on the, on the ground floor of picking the consultant. I think it's really up to the fire chief and who they feel is appropriate, but there's a few players in this market that do these types of studies. So to recap, so it would be to remove the 65,788 and the ancillary from the salary line to put it in contingency, and then we could always switch that back later if we determine that those two positions were necessary. And then to fund the $50,000 to fund the consultant out of the cap and non. So moved.
Second.
Moved, seconded by Counselor Fishbein. Discussion on the motion. Counselor Tata.
Well, I have a procedural question, I guess. So the first motion passed tonight. Let's assume this one passes tonight. So then when we have the vote at the full council meeting, we'll have these two motions. Let's assume both pass at the full council meeting. If the budget were to be vetoed, because the administration doesn't like just one part of that, it would have to be the whole, it's all or nothing, correct? So if the administration said, felt that they liked what we just voted on and that goes through, but they really don't like this, their only option would be to veto the entire package, correct?
Yeah, Mayor, you've never had the perception that the charter creates a line item veto for you, right?
Well, I think the charter in words allows it, but it's difficult to come up with a budget that balances. So I'd have to look further at what all of this means, be able to determine whether it's possible or not.
Okay, I just wanted to, I guess that would just be my concern, that if this one part were not agreeable, but the other part were, I wouldn't want the whole thing to go down because of that. That's all for now. Thank you.
Counselor Testa.
I'll be brief. I'm not in favor of this at all, but I would recommend and suggest my colleague, you got reasonable questions about things. This is the type of thing I think would warrant a request at an agenda for perhaps a subcommittee and an individual agenda discussion about what you'd like to see accomplished. I wouldn't be in favor of doing it this way, but I wouldn't be object to hearing about what you'd like to see done in a different manner. And that would be to get a study done or start a subcommittee to look, to work with the fire department on doing whatever you'd like to see done.
Counselor Marone, is your intention for your cap and non portion of this motion to essentially do what E in the last motion did, which is to starve the cap and non by 50? You're not taking money allocated to cap and non out. You're just not putting that 50 in.
No. I'm taking an extra 50 that's in the cap and non now of the unallocated funds in the cap and non to use for this particular purpose.
Yeah. Okay. That spins things in an interesting way. I think if that's the case, if that's what you're doing, then I think that begs Counselor Testa's analysis under item E about an inappropriate use of cap and non money.
Well, this would be a non-recurring expense, so it would meet the definition under cap and non. And sort of the colloquial definition that we've always used is something that, has a 20-year shelf life and is not, a regular expense. So this would be a one-time expense that would potentially, set a plan for the next 20 years.
Okay. You have the floor now because
Thank
you
you,
had
sir.
your hand up next.
So to Mr. Testa, I guess my concern is there really isn't a venue for us to do this. So we can put it in the budget now and then it becomes an expenditure, right? If we leave it for a council meeting and we say we want to do it and then it doesn't want to get funded at the administrative level, there's really no way that we can do anything with it. So when the fire chief was here for his portion of the budget hearings, I asked him a series of questions about some of the other additions in the budget, and a lot of things were precluded by negotiations that they were involved in at the time. In addition, I'm not a firefighter, I'm not a firefighting expert. There's a lot of things, a lot of the departments we rely on the experts at that department level. My other concern is, we have a chief who's doing a great job, but he has been with the town for a very long time. So if I were to, if you're going to ask me how to improve my company, I can give you recommendations based on what I know, that we do from day to day, but I can't really tell you how that's done in any other company because I've been with the same company for a long time. So I think an outside expert is the only real way to get sort of at the meat and potatoes of that discussion. And again, this isn't meant to be punitive in any way. This is meant to be, could the department be better than what it is now, right? And maybe there isn't a problem. Maybe we spend the money and they find out that everything is great. But I think there's been enough sort of issues, and certainly the replacement pay line is one of them, where I think that it's worth taking a second look at.
Thank you. Councilor Lavin.
I agree with the whole audit thing. How we get there, I guess, going back to Councilor Test is part of the question. Mr. Senna, I guess the question then to you is going back to what Chairman Cervoni was asking about, 50,000 from the cap and non. This would be, maybe Councilor Morone needs to clarify, this is from that extra, the surplus account, the
Correct.
unspent funding over the year, the extras, the savings, I guess, on projects.
Correct.
If maybe historically, if we spent from that fund for this?
So this is more, I don't think this is an appropriate expense for the cap and non-fund. This is more of a service. This isn't capital in nature.
Okay. So we would need to proceed by moving it from another, like a contingency line or something.
You could add a line to the fire department's budget for 50,000.
So we've already reduced the salary line by 65,000. I mean, I would take it directly from salary, but my concern would be if the study comes back and says that you require additional personnel, then I want to know where that money's going to come from now. So that was my thought in moving, it would be a budget neutral to move that money into contingency from the salary line, right? And then we could always put it back.
I think by the time you do a bid or proposal and this study's done, you're not talking about the 23 budget, you're talking about the 24 budget for salary purposes.
So your recommendation then would just be to reduce that line by the two positions and then replace it with another line item for the $50,000 study. And $50,000, but just so you know where I came up with that money, I asked, I talked to a couple of chiefs, and one is in a small department, and he did a study not that long ago, and it cost $28,000, and he's in a smaller community. So I just said, well, we're a bigger community, so I figured it's twice, but that's not it's a guess. So it may be more or less, at the end of the day.
Is this something? Sorry. Okay.
He interrupted you, but it's really still you.
He didn't interrupt. It's fine.
Kidding.
That's fine. Okay. A little different, when the council exercises its like inquiry or investigative authority or powers, how does that get funded? I know it hasn't happened in a long time, but I'm just wondering, because that's stuff that kind of just, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened 5 months into this budget season, we need to act now. How would that normally be funded? Is that all out of contingency, or is there a separate legal fee fund that we would pull from, or be allowed to pull from?
No, there's no automatic
No
fund for it. It would be a question of if the council by majority vote is interested in a study, we would have to appropriate the funds. And whether that came from contingency or some other place, why, certainly I would be supportive if the council by majority was interested in doing this. I think you really have to think about exactly what you want to see studied, however, because it's got to have some direction and some specificity. Otherwise, you might not get much of a report back. So you'd have to think about exactly what kind of analysis you're looking for.
So we can pull from contingency or something. But then, so then in theory, we could move the 65 out of that line account, create another line, leave it there. We needed more or less. We could always move it back to salaries because it would be within the department. We wouldn't have to wait until the end of the April or whatever it was. I think that would achieve what you were going for by stopping them from hiring out of the gate.
Right. Okay, yeah, then I'll amend my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
To the, just what Tom described, the 65,788 out of the salary line, and then create a new line of 50,000 for the study.
Second amended as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Mayor?
so just so I understand, we would not be dealing with EMTs until this study is done?
That was my intent, correct.
Okay, well, that's running in the face of what our professionals are telling us is needed as far as the service in the community.
Counselor Marone?
The motion right now doesn't balance.
It would put extra money,
So if you're
It'd be a
moving
$15,000
65,000 out of salaries,
right.
50,000 into a new line item for the study, where's the other 15,000 going?
Yeah, so the 15,000 would go back to the general fund, I presume.
Just leave it in salaries.
Or you could leave it in salaries, I guess. If that's cleaner.
So it would probably be cleaner to move 50,000 from salaries to the new line item,
Okay, I'll amend my motion.
or whatever your, okay, so if you want the 50,000 out of salaries to fund the study.
Right.
Counselor Fishbein, do you second that?
Yes. Yes, sir. Second is amended as well.
So to the mayor's point, I understand completely where you're coming from. My concern is that the ambulance is going to, the third ambulance is going to lead to greater expenses in the replacement pay line. So if you hire 2 EMTs and they work a full-time shift, they're there for 5 days a week, you're going to have the ambulance operating during the day, theoretically. If one of those guys calls in sick or gets hurt, now you have to replace them with replacement pay, and now you're creating another issue. So it just, I feel like maybe it leads to the potential of piling on to the issue that we're having now. And so that's why I thought this would be a good stopgap. And then if you have a study and it says you need the EMTs, then certainly we'd be happy to fund them.
I certainly appreciate that point. However, I think the report was that there's problems with the regional ambulance response. As a result, the potential is for our apparatus, our engines to wait longer at a site before an ambulance arrives, which ties up equipment and personnel, and that's what they're concerned about, being able to respond to emergencies when they've had such a substantial increase in calls. The study could still be done, but I think it's difficult to ignore what the purpose of this is, which is to meet a significant need, and that is the lack of ambulance response in the region. We no longer are able to depend as easily on the mutual aid. So that's the other side of this. We can still do a study, but the issue of the service is a significant one if we're going to accept the report from the department.
Counselor Allenson?
I appreciate this motion, Councilor Marone. I do definitely understand where your heart is at in this, and I agree with you on the study part of it. My newness maybe doesn't allow me so much. I really want to depend on the expert opinion of the chiefs. So I would say I would totally support an agenda item for the study, because I think that would be, I think regardless of which way this part goes, maybe it needs to be done. And it may help as well with identifying some blind spots that they didn't even know they had. So I would support a study, but maybe just not as part of the budget process.
Counselor Tato?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I agree with Councilor Allenson's sentiments there. I certainly see the need for a study because we see the fire department's costs kind of ballooning, and like you said, the replacement pay and coming for budget transfers to fund that has been a big issue. But then, as the mayor pointed out, the other side of that is that there's a lot of increased call volume. So is that, maybe that cost is just appropriate for the amount of calls that they now need to go on. So my other concern, which I kind of touched on earlier, I'm afraid that by doing this with the budget, because I do think our original motion was such a good bipartisan plan, I think we kind of hammered a lot out, that I'm afraid if the mayor seems very concerned about this aspect of this, and so I'm concerned that if this becomes part of this budget, I wouldn't want to see a budget veto solely because of this part. And I do understand the mayor's concerns that this is certainly a critical function. And so I'm supportive of either, investigation or whatever you want to call it, study. The mayor said he was supportive of that. He just said that if the council decides to do that, he wouldn't have a problem funding it. I know the fire chief said at the budget hearing that he was open to it. So I feel that if everybody is open to it and that's what the council decides to do, I'm hopeful that we would just be able to get the funding through the mayor's office if that's what we chose to do. And so again, I'm leery of not giving them what they say right now they need for such a critical function. And again, also just for the effect that this could have on the ultimate budget, which, like I said, was I think the first motion was a good bipartisan effort that many of us are supportive of. So I don't know that I'm supportive of the way that we're doing this, but certainly supportive of the study in general. Thank you.
Councilor Laffin?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you had said that you were concerned about potentially delaying the EMT hiring if we took money from this line. Is there a line or a better place that you feel we would need to act now to meet the same intent that you are more comfortable with? I'm just trying to figure out the best way to get this done.
Well, it certainly could be a line in the fire department budget.
Right, so where does the $50,000 come from, I guess, is what because you don't want to take, you're saying don't take it out of salaries right now, even though things would be moving at the same time. I'm less concerned about the salary part. I understand the concern. I was just wondering if there's a different place that would, just as an alternative for us to consider.
I mean, the source of the funds?
Yeah.
Well, you would add it back into the budget.
Anyone else? Sorry, Councilor Zandri.
No, it just came up. You didn't miss me. Do we know, Mr. Senna, right now where the budget currently is for the fire department? Are they behind? Are they ahead? The numbers that I have here, it looks as if they're running. They appear to be running with a surplus, but I want to know if you've got more up-to-date numbers.
I didn't look at that exactly, but if I would have to take a guess, I think they're running on schedule or giving them, not using it all. So heading
So-
for a surplus.
They would run a surplus the way that it's running?
I believe so, but,
Is this one of
things
those?
change.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. Is this one of those things where we could do like an appropriation in force? If they've got the money there, could we kind of earmark it, line item it, push it forward and spend it in the next budget?
So you're asking if we put this, if you put this on an agenda item to get it in, to do a transfer in the year that we're in, and then could you put it in for appropriation in force?
Yes, so if we didn't pass this right now in this current budget, could, as an example, we put it as an item on the agenda for the next meeting or the following meeting, saying we go through, we'll do a fine-tooth comb review and find something that there's 20,000 here, 30,000 there, create a new line item and do it in appropriation and force to spend it next budget. Is that something we could do?
I would have to check with Janice on that one. I don't know. I don't think we can do an appropriate, off the top of my head, I don't think we can do an appropriation and force on something that hasn't been appropriated yet.
Okay.
So the appropriations and force get.
It's something we've already, it's like a line item we've already created, we're not gonna get it done, and we're gonna shove it into next year.
Yes.
All right, and I'm just trying to find a creative way to do this, because this money's just gonna end up rolling into the general fund balance, and then we're gonna be we're looking to allocate it right now, which is gonna tap away at the reduction, and much to Councilor Tada's point earlier, it might be another thing that adds a concern to the mayor in his decision to accept or reject the changes that we're bringing today. And I'm trying to minimize tipping it over the edge if we're not already there.
So if you were to get this in the current year's budget, and there's a purchase order in place for the vendor before June 30th, then that, as long as they've been, sorry, I'm losing the word I'm looking for. As long as they've been obligated, the vendor's been chosen, and the work is set to begin, and they're ready to begin, then that money is encumbered, and until the project's done, it's open. But the problem is if you were to do that, and then, the bids don't come back before June 30th, and it's not encumbered, then you're in the same spot you're at.
Okay, so given that, it did sound, well, I guess the question kind of just goes to the mayor then. So if we can't find a creative way to not get the funds from this budget to the next budget, and we left everything else alone, and we wanted to come up with doing this, say the bids come back July or August, and that's when we could execute, what are our options? Can we take money from contingency to do something like this? Would we have to try to muggle it out of somewhere else, or how would it work?
Well, typically, it would have to come from contingency.
All right, that's another thought then. So I don't know, I guess I kind of bring it back up to all of us to think about. Joe, how do you want to try to go forward? I'm in support of the idea. I'm just trying not to make yet another impact on the budget.
Right.
To do it. So it sounds like we've got a couple of options. We could try to gun run it before the end of the year. I don't know. I've seen POs go long, bids go out and take longer. But are we comfortable maybe doing this after the budget is closed, and set to go, and asking if we can move money out of contingency to do the same thing?
I think the council loses a lot of ability, if I may, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
You may.
I think the council loses a lot of ability to spend money, though, outside of the budget process, right? This is our time in the spotlight, so if we don't do it now, we have less decisions in the future. However, if the mayor's concern is losing the two positions, maybe we leave the salary line alone and we take the $50,000 from the replacement pay line. So the chief said that he has everything he needs. We took money out of the overtime line and the public works budget, and it ended up putting most of it back, but they cut some other things which ended up getting funded anyway. So would it be cleaner then to just take the $50,000 out of the replacement pay line to fund the study? The study will tell us what we need in terms of personnel, and we can make adjustments from there.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't affect the budget overall. It doesn't change the requirements to add or remove funds from anything, I guess. And even in the situation where if the department needs it later on down the line, they can kind of move it around. I guess that works. I like that a little bit better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Tada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things. Number one, I'm still concerned. I don't know if we just ask the mayor what he thinks about that. Would you be opposed to taking the money from the replacement pay and using it, making a line item for a study?
I'd have some real concerns about taking money from an operating account when we're told that that is what is needed. I think there's ways to handle this. One way is to increase the budget by the 50,000 or whatever for a study. Anything else will be problematic. I notice the contingency line is being reduced by $100,000. I mean, I've got serious concerns right across the board on this whole thing.
All right, thank you, some of that helps. So, yeah, so that's my concern. So we just heard Mr. Mayor say that he would be very concerned if we reduce that line. And again, I'm looking for ways, I was really looking for ways with this budget where everybody can kind of get on board and agree, and I don't want this to derail everything else if this is a concern. So that being said, I would not be supportive of reducing any lines. I guess if we felt strongly enough that we really wanted to fund it out of the next budget rather than just try to do this now during this budget, I think maybe the appropriate thing to do would be to add the money to the town council line, and then we would be able to spend that on the study. I think I would be more supportive of that. Obviously, we worked hard to reduce expenditures, and now we're adding 50,000 back, but we still have the net. We still have a net reduction. So I guess I could probably support that better, but I would not be supporting anything that the mayor has concerns about at this point in regards to this.
Mr. Chairman, if I can help with this, it's right on the record. If you vote that you want to have a study, we will have a study. So whether it's now in the budget or not, I think that's a serious issue where we should make those kinds of inquiries. So we will do it.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. That sounds good to me. I like that, the mayor's willing to work with us, and I think then maybe we don't set anything aside for it. We could just do it in the current budget, or we find it next year. But I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. My other question is for Mr. Senna. This is in regards to this motion and the previous one and any ones that may come after this. Whatever motions do pass, are you able to tell us as soon as possible how that would affect the mill rate and what would happen? Because I know a few years ago before I was on here, I think there was a budget where the council thought it was going to have a certain effect, and then the night of the vote, they realized it wasn't going to have that effect. And so I just want to make sure that what our intent is with these motions is what will actually financially occur. So is that something you could get us maybe like this week before our next meeting, just so if we need to make amendments, we have some time?
I have it right now.
Oh, wonderful.
Councilor, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For what so just the first motion that you passed today with the information you gave me ahead of time?
Yes.
That would bring the mill rate to 28.39, and it would be per household about $25 for the year savings.
Great. And our current mill rate is, I'm sorry.
28.52.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, and I just want everyone to be clear, that's only for the one motion that's passed so far. So any subsequent, we would have to.
And why I have the floor, can I just remind that the mayor passed out a memo at one of the things that we need to increase the building department's other pay by $16,900. It was omitted when we were going through the budget process. So that I actually factored that into the numbers that I just gave you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I believe I factored that into the numbers on my sheet that I passed out to everybody also. So, okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm glad we got that tonight. Thank you.
You're next, Councilor Marone.
Thank you. So if the mayor certainly, I appreciate his willingness to work with us on this, and the council seems to be more or less in favor, so I'll withdraw the motion then. and ask that this be placed on the next appropriate agenda.
Duly noted. Okay. Any other motions on the budget? Mayor?
Yeah, I think we need a motion for the on-call pay,
Is that 6,000,
16,000.
16,000?
16,900, so it
So
would
moved.
come, so it would increase taxes current by 16,900 and increase building other pay by 16,900. It has no effect on the mill rate.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. There being none, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Allenson,
Yes.
Carmody,
Yes.
Fishbein, Laffin,
Yes.
Marone,
Yes.
Tata,
Yes.
Testa, Zandri,
Yes.
Chairman Cervoni.
Yes, the motion passes.
Sorry, was I on mute? I'm sorry. I voted yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
motion passes unanimously. If there are no further motions, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I declare this meeting adjourned.